Republican Senator Tim Scott, who's in charge of helping get Republicans elected to the U.S. Senate, said he wants to see a GOP Senate of 55 seats in 2026. Can he do it? Well, we're going to talk about that in today's video. Senator Tim Scott said he's working to expand the Republican Senate majority by 2 seats in the 2026 Senate midterms. Why it matters. The comments from Scott, who chairs the National Republican Senatorial Committee, signal that the GOP is taking an offensive posture heading into next year's midterms, despite historical trends that would position them to suffer losses. Quote, "I'd like it to be at 55, Scott told Axios' Stephen Kite on Tuesday during Axios' 2025 What's Next Summit. Senate Republicans currently hold a majority in the Senate of 53 to 47. Scott, who is taking his first turn as head of the Senate's GOP campaign arm, said he met this week with former New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu about a possible run to replace retiring Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen. Shaheen's decision not to seek re-election, along with the retirements of incumbent Democrats in Michigan and Minnesota, certainly adds a little optimism, Scott said. Yes, but Scott acknowledged that the Republicans also need to successfully defend seats in states like Maine and North Carolina, both of which he conceded are 2 very hard seats for us to hold. So those are the statements that Scott made, and it's a really interesting quote by Scott, because right now, looking at the Senate map in 2026, it starts out with about 51 Senate seats I'm very confident the Republicans are going to win. And it starts out with 44 Democratic Senate seats I'm very confident they are going to win. And there's about 5 Senate seats right now that I see as being really competitive, being Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, New Hampshire, and Maine. In the right scenario, such as if the Republicans have like an amazing night, there is a possibility that states like Minnesota and Virginia could maybe become competitive. On the flip side, if the Democrats have an amazing night, it's possible I could see the state of Ohio maybe getting competitive. But all 3 of those Senate seats, I'm pretty confident right now, are going to remain with their current party that currently holds the seat. So Scott mentioned getting up to 55 Senate seats, and what would that entail? Well, as I mentioned, the Republicans currently sit at 53 Senate seats. And to do that, they're going to have to hold the Senate seats they already hold and also flip at least 2 of them, getting up to 55. Just to give you an idea of what the current composition of the Senate is, right now the Democrats currently hold the Senate seats in New Hampshire, in Michigan, and in Georgia. That puts the Democrats at 47. Republicans currently hold North Carolina and Maine. So just quick math here, of the 5 Senate seats that are up, Democrats currently hold 3 and Republicans hold 2. So the Democrats have to defend 1 extra Senate seat than the Republicans do. What's interesting, and the article does mention this, is historically midterm elections usually are a referendum of the president and the president's incumbent party, and typically the off party, the one that's not in charge, typically does very well in a midterm election. Though this doesn't always be an exact science, things can be flipped. In 2022, for instance, the Republicans were on track to have an amazing night and do very, very well, and the popular vote for the Senate across the country was actually Republican plus 0.1. So that was very, very close, where it was a very close election, and the Republicans didn't have the massive wave they thought they were going to. Meanwhile, in 2018, it ended up being a midterm election that was very much a repudiation of President Trump, and the Democrats ended up having an amazing night. 2014, the Republicans had an amazing night and really took back a lot of Senate seats and governor seats from the Democrats in President Obama's final midterm. So it could either go one of few ways, and we're really not going to have a clear idea on this until like a few weeks before the 2026 elections. So at this far out, it's going to be really hard to predict and get it totally right. But going off all the information we have right now, Republicans winning 55 Senate seats is certainly attainable. But to do so, we have to talk about the 5 races that are available. The first is the state of Georgia. Georgia is the probably most likely Republican flip at this time, because this is Democratic incumbent Senator Jon Ossoff. And he is a very formidable Democratic candidate, and no doubt about it, he's going to be in this very, very close competitive race that he could win. All eyes in Georgia are on the governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp. Brian Kemp has been consistently the strongest performing Republican in state politics in Georgia, and if he were to run for the Senate seat, gives the Republicans the best chance at winning this seat. Winning this seat back. In the early preliminary polling that's been done so far, when Brian Kemp has been included in the polls, he's won every single poll. It's only been 3, but he has won every single one. Every other Republican against Jon Ossoff has not won so far. Jon Ossoff versus generic Republican, and 1 Republican poll shows a tied race. So if it's Brian Kemp versus John Ossoff, and we've actually seen Tim Scott trying really hard to recruit Kemp to run against Ossoff, I think we could see a lean Republican win, meaning under 5 points but more than 1 point margin of victory when the election is over for Kemp versus Ossoff. And for the sake of this video, I'm going off that assumption that Kemp will run. If Kemp does not run, I'll say it right now, I think Ossoff holds this race as a lean Democratic margin. So this is where I think the Republicans getting the right candidates in these races really, really does matter. So let's say we have the state of Georgia flipping to the Republicans. Next, to get to 55 seats, I actually think the most important one for the Republicans to hold is the state of Maine with Susan Collins. Because Maine at this point, I'm actually more confident Susan Collins can win than Thom Tillis in North Carolina can. And I'll explain to you why. So in Maine, we have Susan Collins, who is a longtime Republican incumbent. She was first elected back in 1997 and has held this race in a long time. Of the Democrats that could run, there's a lot of potential candidates, but there's no real clear indicator if any of Jared Golden, Troy Jackson, Janet Mills, or Shelley Pingree are going to run. And even if they do run, we did just see in 2020, Susan Collins was able to win re-election in Maine by 8.6%. In 2020, when you may remember, the Democrats had a very good night, won the presidential election in Maine, I believe voted for about 8 points or so for Joe Biden over Donald Trump. And Collins was able to win on that ballot. Collins has a history of being a more moderate Republican that's broken with President Trump multiple times now, and that has helped her in a state like Maine, which in the presidential race in 2024 just voted for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump by about 7 points. Collins is able to get enough moderates, independents, and even some Democrats to vote for her due to her longtime incumbency advantage. That being said, if the Democrats have a very good night, there's no guarantee Collins will win or will even win by the same numbers she did before. That's why I'm actually putting it just at lean Republican, where it goes nearly under 5 points on the first ballot. I think she could win something like 51% to 46%, with the Democrats consolidating more support than they had in the 2020 election with Susan Collins. But I think it is a possibility the Democrats could maybe get lucky and win Maine, but we're going to have to wait and see on that. This puts Republicans at 53, Democrats are at 44. Now we have the state of North Carolina. North Carolina is the last of the 3 toss-up states that has an incumbent running in it. And the incumbent senator in North Carolina is Thom Tillis. Every election Thom Tillis has been in has been a very, very close, bitter fight. Thom Tillis right now is running for re-election as a Republican senator. He does have a few Republican challengers, one from Don Brown, a candidate from North Carolina's 8th District in 2024, and another Andy Nilsen. Whether or not he gets a more high-profile Republican primary challenger, that remains to be seen, but Tillis and Trump have had their differences and such on a lot of issues, and Tillis has problems with the MAGA wing of the party. Has that support been consolidated a little bit in the purpose of getting him reelected? It's possible. We're going to have to wait and see how that develops. But I don't think Tillis being primaried is necessarily the biggest concern for him. The biggest concern for Thom Tillis is who his Democratic opponent could be. Last time around, his opponent, Cal Cunningham, had a late-breaking scandal towards the end of the campaign, which ended up hurting him and helping Tillis win a very, very close election. This time around, he's probably going to be facing off against former North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper or former U.S. Representative of North Carolina Willie Nickel, both of which would be very strong, formidable Democratic candidates. A narrow edge given to Roy Cooper being the more strong of the two, but both of them would be very formidable against Tillis. We've seen some elections in North Carolina that have been very close. In 2022, Ted Budd won re-election by 3.2%, just breaking 50% of the vote. In 2020, when Tillis won re-election, he won by 1.7%, getting under 50% of the vote, only getting 48.69%. He won, Tillis won, but there was also a third-party candidate getting about 3 points and another one getting about 1.5 points, giving Tillis a plurality win. Looking back at 2016, the other Republican, Senator Burr at the time, won the race by 5.7 points. Tillis was elected for the first time in 2014 by just 1.6%, again getting 48.82% of the vote. The Democratic incumbent senator at the time got 47.26%. This was in a very good Republican year in 2014. What does this mean for 2026? Well, this is where things get tough, because we just saw the Democrat Josh Stein win the North Carolina governor race against Mark Robinson. There was a scandal on the Republican side, so really you can't say that has too much meaning for this race. But you can look at 2020 when Roy Cooper was able to win re-election by 4.5 points on the same ballot where Donald Trump won the state of North Carolina. He won by 4.5. 2016, again, Roy Cooper got elected for the first time on the same ballot when Donald Trump won the state. He only won here with 49.02% and 0.22% margin of victory over the Republican Governor McCrory. So both Cooper in 2016 and Tillis in every election have won by a plurality of the vote. The only time one of them didn't was Cooper in 2020 when he won by 4.5%. So what does this mean? Does this mean Thom Tillis is automatically going to lose because he's facing Roy Cooper? No, it doesn't. Tillis can certainly win this race, and it can certainly be held by the Republicans. But does this mean that Thom Tillis, just because he's a Republican incumbent in North Carolina, is guaranteed to hold this state? No, it doesn't. Because Roy Cooper has won by a bigger margin most recently than Thom Tillis ever did. Tillis' biggest margin of victory win is 1.7%. Cooper's is 4.5%. And governor's races and Senate races are very different. And I'm sure as this race picks up, President Trump will do some campaigning for Tillis to try and help him out, get more votes out for him. But this race is going to come down to the wire. In the Republican scenario to get up to 55 Senate seats, it probably involves North Carolina going red. But is it possible on election night that Roy Cooper could defeat Thom Tillis and flip North Carolina blue for the first time in a very long time at the president and Senate level? Yes, that is certainly possible. For the sake of today's video, I'm leaving it as tilt Republican, but it is certainly one that could go really either way, as the article with Tim Scott mentioned. Now with 54 Senate seats, how do the Republicans get to 55? Well, there's Michigan and there's New Hampshire. Typically, I would say Michigan is more likely to go red, seeing as President Trump just won it in the 2024 presidential race. But due to Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen retiring, New Hampshire, I would say, is actually the more likely pickup opportunity for the Republicans. And that's because one of the potential candidates for the Republicans right now is former Governor Chris Sununu. Chris Sununu has been consistently one of the most popular Republicans in state politics in New Hampshire for a very long time now. Kelly Ayotte just won the New Hampshire governor's race by 9 points in 2024. In 2022, Sununu got reelected by 15.5 points. In 2020, Sununu won by 32 points. In 2018, he won re-election by 7 points. And in 2016, he got elected by 2.3. So Sununu has been one of the most successful Republicans in New Hampshire politics in a very long time at winning elections and getting reelected. And all the polling data shows so far, he would be the strongest candidate in a Senate race for the Republicans without question. When we look at the hypothetical polling of Chris Sununu versus Chris Pappas, there's been one poll by Qantas Insights. It is Sununu up by 9 points. And before she dropped out, there was one poll for Sununu versus Shaheen, which showed Sununu up by 8 points. On the same poll, when Scott Brown and Frank Edelblut both were losing to Shaheen. So Chris Sununu certainly presents the Republicans the best chance at winning this race. And the Democrats are going to likely put up one of Chris Pappas, the representative from New Hampshire District 1, or Maggie Goodlander, the U.S. representative from New Hampshire's District 2. They're the most likely candidates at this time. The problem is Chris Sununu, just being governor for the Democrats, has high name recognition, and he left office with a very high approval rating in New Hampshire, and he's also shown willingness to both work with Republicans and Democrats and break from President Trump, which in New Hampshire does seem to be the popular thing to do, as we did just see President Trump lose to Kamala Harris by about 3 points at the presidential race, and as I mentioned, at the governor's race, Kelly Ayotte won by 9 points, and she's in the same political mold as Chris Sununu is, a Republican that will support President Trump on some things and break with President Trump on another. You could say Sununu and Ayotte are more like a little bit more conservative than a typical New England Republican. So Sununu, I really think, offers the Republicans the best chance at winning New Hampshire, so much so that if the election were today, I would have Chris Sununu winning the Senate race by a lean Republican margin. Now, this is obviously, like Georgia, very contingent on if Chris Sununu decides to run for this election or not. If Sununu runs, I think he wins in a lean margin. If Sununu does not run, I think Pappas would actually be favored and win by a lean Democratic margin. Again, this is why getting the right candidate matters. But as Tim Scott mentioned in the article, Sununu, I think, does give the Republicans the best chance at winning New Hampshire, and I do think actually it would happen regardless, because I think Chris Sununu's high approval ratings would be able to go beyond what a typical good Democratic midterm year 2026 should be based on precedent. I think Sununu's approval ratings would be enough to eke out a close victory against a Democrat like Pappas when it would typically be a good Democratic night. Sununu's willingness to break with the Republicans on some things would be enough to, I think, buck that trend. The last remaining Senate seat is Michigan. Michigan's really tough because theoretically the Republicans on a good night could win the Senate seat. I'm more of the mind right now that I think it stays in the Democratic hands, a large part being the Republicans really don't have a strong recruit on the Republican side. The best chance they have is probably Mike Rogers, the Republican who just lost the 2024 Senate race in a very, very close election by 0.3%. But he also lost it in the same ballot as Donald Trump when Donald Trump was able to win the state of Michigan. This time around, Trump won't be on the ballot, and the Republicans have not fared too well in Michigan recently when Trump has not been on the ballot. If you want to look back at recent elections, I mean, you could look at 2022. If you want, you can look at the governor's race. Gretchen Whitmer won by 10.5 points. You can look at 2018 if you want to go back to there. Whitmer won by 9.6. The Senate level, things haven't been all that better either. 2024, again, close race with Trump on the ballot, but you can look at 2020. Peters is able to win there, 1.7, again, with Trump on the ballot. 2018, no Trump on the ballot. The Democrats won by 6.5. So until I see things change and maybe the polling gets a little bit better, I would stay Michigan in the Democratic side, kind of on the edge between likely and lean. I'm putting it in lean for now. But Michigan could be winnable for the Republicans. But right now, if Tim Scott wants to get 55 Senate seats, I think the path right now goes through Georgia, North Carolina, New Hampshire, and Maine. Those, I think, are the 4 Senate seats Republicans need to win, in addition to their safe Republican seats to get to 55. Is it possible that Republicans could maybe pull out a close victory in Michigan and Democrats could hold New Hampshire, and that could also get Republicans to 55? That is possible, though I would bet more likely Sununu runs and wins New Hampshire, and Democrats end up narrowly winning Michigan. If Sununu does not run, then maybe Michigan's more likely to go red than New Hampshire is, but that's a conversation for a later day. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to give it a like. Please remember to click subscribe and leave a comment below telling me any thoughts or questions you have about this video. Do you think this is possible? Do you think Republicans could do well in 2026, or do you think 2026 will be a good Democratic night? I'm interested to hear what you have to say. Thank you so much for watching and hope to see you in the next video.